So we have a few questions for you. Have you ever attended a protest or a rally in your hometown, or have you traveled to see one? Have you heard of one? Have you heard of any current or past activist groups in the United States? And what kind of activism, what kind of protests have you seen on social media or on TV? And what are the main types of activism you've seen on social media? So if you can think about these questions, and if you want, you can come up to the camera and answer them.
You can also discuss with your table or partner for a little bit if you'd like to first.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I've never actually attended any protests or rallies, but I definitely think that a lot of activism we see on social media or TV is political. Like a lot of the controversy that is mainly about countries and security, and any current or past activists that are topics or groups that I've heard of in the United States. The one that stands out the most to me is the Women's March. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's been a very big topic recently, women's rights, and there was a big women's march in DC and also around the world that happened in various cities around the world. Yeah, that was good.
I wanted to say that another group that's protesting is a movement. It's the Black Lives Matter movement, which stands out, and it's been going on for a couple of years. And I think it's really, it's like they're trying to protest for equal rights for all. And I think that's
Yes, for sure. The Black Lives Matter movement has been going on for quite a few years now, but it's gained a lot of importance in recent times. So
okay. A protest that I've seen a lot is the protest against Northwest Pipeline, and the Native Americans protesting against the pipeline because it's going through their reservoirs and their reservations, and it could possibly contaminate food. Federal action was supposed to happen, but now I think since President switched, now they're going through with it, and they're still protesting and hoping that it will stop. Okay, well, there have been protests on the travel bans from several countries in the Middle East based upon Donald Trump's choices.
You guys sure have been following the news. It's awesome. Does anyone have any idea of some past activist groups or topics in the US?
In the past, there was the civil rights movement, where also, yeah.
This is kind of random, but has anyone been to the Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro? Yeah, wow, a lot of you. That's awesome. Over spring break, I was there, so that's kind of been fresh on my mind lately. It's a great museum.
We went on a field trip there.
Oh, that's super cool. That's awesome. That's great. So I guess if no one has, oh yes we do. Someone else.
Okay, so one group that has been pretty active, I guess, even right now, is ISIS, and the war on Mosul, though it's kind of it disappeared a little bit from news stations. It's currently going on, so that's a current issue.
This doesn't really happen it's not really in the US, but in Hong Kong, there's the Yellow Umbrella movement where a lot of the millennials and the younger people are fighting against like the sort of like dictatorship, like the tight control that is on their government.
It's a great global example.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting.
Okay, well, this is also not in the US, and it's more of a current thing. And there have been protests against the South Korean past president, who was a woman, because they believe that she shared confidential evidence with someone who wasn't in office. This is okay. So, actually, I don't think this is this far into the past, but like 2 years ago, there was there was a terrorist attack in France against a French newspaper, and then like a lot of people in France started protesting the Jesus Charlie movement. I think that was yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a topic I have done a lot of research into and have actually presented on a lot. It's a very important movement about the right of speech and the right of press.
There's also like the Syrian refugee protesters who, like, the Syrian refugees are being directed to different countries in Europe and stuff.
Very knowledgeable classroom, you guys. This is awesome. It's great to hear from you. I think we probably have to move on just because I guess it's kind of like been like 20 minutes or so, so we should probably move forward. But thank you guys so much for your thoughtful answers.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, me and Sylvia are going to talk about specific artists from the two countries who have like protested or like creative movements in their own countries. I'm going to start with India, and um, so historically, art and like around the world, but especially in India, has been very religious based. Regardless of what religion the artist belongs to, it has art seems to be like self-expression wise has been expressing their religion and their beliefs in about the world. But some art and architecture, as you know, probably has been created for other reasons. In India, most famously, the Taj Mahal. So here are some pictures that I took when I went to India of various monuments and like temples and places that I visited. And this is some of the art that was like very historical art. They have like carved out images of various gods and deities into the rock, into marble, and created temples. They also, this is all Hindu art, but there's obviously other religions in India that have created their own types of art. And this is also a painting that me and my mom saw at a temple that's very religious also. But here are some examples of non-religious art. This is some like major landmarks in India. Right here is on the top left is the tomb of Akbar, who was a great emperor of like the Mughal Empire a very very long time ago. And they built this huge tomb for him, which is beautiful. And you can go inside and look at it, and they have a lot of like there's a lot of historical significance and stuff. And then on the bottom left is the Red Fort of Agra. It is a military base, but as you can tell, it is also a great architectural feat. And they have like designs and like paintings and things carved into the stone to make it an art piece as well as a military base. And on the right, as you all can probably recognize, is the Taj Mahal. It is actually a tomb. It was built by Shah Jahan, who was an emperor, for his wife. When she died, he built this huge monument, a mausoleum around her, and it's supposed to be a tribute to his love for her. So as you can tell, there's been like very religious art and also very not like secular, non-religious art for other reasons, to like commemorate a person or even just like a part of life, like a war monument or stuff like that. But more contemporarily, more recently, art has been changing to fit the political atmosphere. Artists are becoming more of activists, more leaders in their community to speak out against political things that have been happening, like policies that have been being passed and stuff like that. One very famous artist in India, especially in recent times, is Rummana Hussain. She was like a very very famous artist in the 90s. She was born in 1952 to a prominent Muslim family, and she like lived as she practiced Islam like Islam throughout her life, and but it wasn't like a main part of her art. Her art was more political and socially focused. She was considered one of India's first performance artists. So prior to this, most art was very like literary or visual, like paintings or architecture wise. But she was considered one of the first performance artists, so people would come to watch her perform and speak out against political decisions. And she began her career working with figurative paintings. I have another example on the next slide of one of her earlier works. And she would, even in those paintings, she would speak out about she would speak out politically and about social norms. But after the violence that and protests of the 1990s and the destruction of a mosque in 1992, she changed her focus to be even more politically active. She felt like it was necessary to use art to convey issues central to the human condition, and she believed that art was meant to be accessible to people of all classes. So it shouldn't be only for the wealthy, and it shouldn't only be for the people, for literate people or people who could read or access museums and stuff like that. It should be accessible to everyone. So she decided to do performance art to make it accessible to everyone. Here on the top left is an example of her earlier work. As you can see, it's very figurative, and it is very metaphorical. It's not very, it's very symbolic. And on the bottom right is one of her more, I guess her later works after she decided to be more politically based, and it's a lot less symbolic. It's quite symbolic, but it's a lot less easy to understand. But it has a lot more of a meaning to the social atmosphere of the time. And as you can see in this picture right here, this is actually her most famous performance art. She had a gourd in her hand, and she cut it in half, and she walked around in circles for, I believe it was 30 to 45 minutes, just walking in a circle with her mouth open as if she was screaming, but she wasn't making any noise, to show that she has been silenced by whatever political party was in power at the time, and to show that the people have been silenced, women and religious minorities have been silenced, stuff like that. And she was a big feminist of the time, and she was one of the most prominent feminists of Indian society at the time. And even today, she's still known as a huge feminist icon. And yeah, here are some other examples of her work. She did very minimalistic things, but it had a lot of meaning, and she often collaborated with other artists. The bottom right picture is a collaboration with another Indian artist that she did. It was actually put up in a museum in New York, and her work has been displayed all around the world. I believe the top left is an exhibit in a museum in Chicago, and then the bottom right is an exhibit in New York. Yeah, so she was and still is a very important icon in Indian art and Indian social activism. Yeah. All right, Sylvia, the other.
Hey guys, can you exit share screen? Oh, okay, you just did. Awesome. Thanks. Okay, let's see. Okay, can you guys see this? You can just nod if. Okay, cool. Let's see. No. I will present it. Yay. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to talk to you guys about Austria today. I'm trying to think if I talked about it last time or not. I feel like I talked about Hungary last time. So I studied abroad in Austria, which is why I chose Austria, because in Hungary, there hasn't been a ton of arts activism from what I could find. Don't really know very much about that. And it was difficult for Austria as well, honestly, to find somebody, but I think that this will be interesting, so hopefully you guys find it interesting. Just a reminder again, Austria is located in the middle of Europe, and it's a pretty small country, about 9 million people. The biggest city, Vienna, is the capital, and it's in the east, right here. and about 2 million people live in Vienna. A lot of famous artists have come from Austria of all different I guess styles of art. So there's a lot of musicians from Austria. Has anyone heard of Mozart? Or basically. So he was born in Salzburg and lived in Vienna. We have other examples as well, but of course that's music. But yeah, so Austria has produced a lot of different, I guess, composers, artists, music in that regard. But today I'm going to be talking to you about a guy named Friedensreich Hundertwasser, and he was an artist and architect, and he's mainly known for his architecture. He lived from 1928 to about 2001, and he lived all over the world. He was born in Vienna and lived in Vienna for a lot of his life, and then he moved to New Zealand, I think, at the end of his life. But he started off as an artist and then became an architect. But in order to understand Hundertwasser, we have to look at Austria's history. So in the beginning of the 1900s, or the 20th century, Austria was a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with Hungary, the Habsburg Empire, and it had a lot of power. It was one of the great powers in Europe. It was the land empire in Europe, but it broke apart after World War I. Does anyone know how World War I started? Do you want to come up and say it, or should you don't have to if you don't want to, but you can.
It started when Archduke was murdered in Austria.
Awesome, thank you. Yep, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was murdered in Sarajevo, in Bosnia, what is current-day Bosnia, but it was a territory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. In Bosnia, the former Yugoslavia, is a very volatile region. It was, at least in the past, and recent past, unfortunately. But basically, during World War I, Austria lost a lot of territory. It went from being a pretty big empire to being a small country, similar with Hungary. It lost a lot of land. And the Habsburg Empire was a multi-ethnic empire. That meant it had a lot of different ethnicities in it. They had Bohemians and Hungarians and Austrians, so it's pretty interesting. But after World War I, during the interwar period, Austria had been on the wrong side, I guess. They were with the Triple Alliance with Germany, and that meant that they lost the war, which meant that they were very bankrupt and had, had to pay, they were kind of punished, I guess, by the Allies, just like Germany was. And this created an atmosphere of tension, and Austria actually had a fascist dictator for a while, Albert Dollfuss, and he was in Vienna. He was actually assassinated by German Nazis, or German-sponsored Austrian Nazis, because Austrian fascists were different than German fascists, the National Socialist Party. But in 1938, what happened was Der Anschluss, which is the annexation of Austria, basically. The prime minister, the person leading Austria after Dollfuss, was more moderate, and he did not want Austria to join, I guess, the German Empire, but Germany basically was called in to help the Austrian fascists or Austrian Nazis, so that they would take over, and a lot of the Austrians were happy about it and celebrated being a part of the German Empire. So that was Der Anschluss in 1938, and then of course World War II started in 1939, and it was very destructive in Austria. Again, Austria found itself to be kind of on the wrong side, and Der Anschluss is a pretty controversial topic today, because the Allies afterward said that Austria was the first victim, but if you look at the way that the Austrian people responded to Hitler's annexation, like going into the German Empire, they're actually really happy, and it seemed to be pretty voluntary. So it's a very controversial topic even today. And Hundertwasser was angry about the way Austrian society was handling this involvement, I guess, with the Nazis, because basically they were saying that they were a victim, but he didn't feel like that was the truth. So after World War II, just a quick history, there was occupation by the Allies, just like Germany was split up into 4 different zones, and Vienna, like Berlin, was split into 4 different zones. But in order to get out of that, basically, and to have independence, they declared neutrality in 1955, which was kind of in the middle, like really start of the Cold War. And so they were neutral, just like Switzerland, and they still are neutral, which meant that occupation stopped. And then in 1995, they became members of the EU. But these are all important facts to know, I guess, when talking about Hundertwasser in the context of his life, so, and his work. Okay, so again, he lived from 1928 to 2001. He lived in Vienna and then traveled all around the world. And he did all kinds of different art. He started out with paintings, which I'll show you in a minute, but then moved toward architecture, and his architecture is pretty famous in Central Europe. He was affected by the Nazi regime in very personal ways. So part of his maternal family were killed. And so he was angry that basically Austrian society was saying that they didn't really have a part of the war, or that they weren't like collaborating with the Nazis, even though in a lot of ways they were. So this is one of the reasons why he was like, felt like he should speak out. So he was trying to protest, I guess, just the typical, more drab style of art, I guess, in his opinion. So he rarely used straight lines. He wanted to use very organic lines in his painting, and he used a lot of color. So he's known for just having a lot of color and a lot of like just like curves and different types of these lines that aren't straight, in order to have like a more organic feel through his paintings and his work. And then around the 1950s, he started focusing like more on architecture, and he applied it to that. So he used a lot of color. He rarely used straight lines. He produced some really interesting buildings. He was really into nature, and so he started to kind of his activism was not only to kind of protest this geometric shape architecturally of the Bauhaus style, which I'll show you in a minute, but also to incorporate nature into like ways of life and living. And so in his work, he like has a lot of different green, like natural greenery in like his architecture. So his architectural style was also a reaction to Bauhaus, and Bauhaus is like this gray, very geometric, very like, I don't know, sterile style. It's simple. It's supposed to be very modern. Use a lot of concrete. Originated in Germany. Started really in like the 1920s, but a lot of post-war architecture was of the Bauhaus style from Reconstruction from World War II. And as you can see, it's pretty monochromatic. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I mean, some people like it, so that's cool. But this was considered to be like the modern style. So in his early work, Hundertwasser, here's like one of his earlier paintings. I forget which year it was, but you can see there's really barely any straight lines, or if they are, you know, they're not very great, I guess. Not very many of them. And you can tell he uses a lot of color. Gustav Klimt is another famous Austrian artist, and he used a lot of color as well. So as you can see, it's kind of like landscape-y paintings, drawings. Pretty interesting, I guess. And he moved towards architecture after he was painting. So this is one of his more famous works. This is the Hundertwasser House in Vienna, which is a place I've been to, and I'll show you a couple of personal photos. I was there this summer, and it's a really cool place. He used a lot of like nature. As you can see, there's greenery, like trees on the top, trees kind of all around, and all kinds of colors. And so, yeah, here's me and my cousin. We took a day trip, but it was a really pretty day, and there's a lot of greenery, and you can tell there's not like a lot of straight lines. It looks pretty cool, and people actually live in this building. It's like an apartment place. And so I think it would be really cool to live there. I'm really happy. Has anyone heard of like the Ronald McDonald House, like foundation, like Ronald McDonald houses around the world in America? No, yes, no. Okay, so it's part of, it's like the philanthropic arm of McDonald's. We have one in Winston-Salem as well, and this is relevant, don't worry. But this house is what the Ronald McDonald House is in Essen, Germany. And it was designed by Hundertwasser. The Ronald McDonald House is for families who have children who are sick in the hospital. And it's a place for them to stay that's low cost and nearby. So the one in Winston-Salem that I volunteered at for a while is very nice. But I feel like this one is pretty artsy. And as you can tell, again, there's a lot of greenery and it's very colorful. Looks like to be a very happy place and has this like McDonald's colors of green or red and yellow. So another example is the Hundertwasser Kirche, or the like church, the Hundertwasser Church that he designed. It's in Styria, which is in like southern Austria, kind of nearby. But as you can tell, again, a very non-traditional church, very different from like the Gothic or Baroque styles typical in Europe. And again, in another like a green area. Yes. And then this one I like a lot. I would love to go visit. It's in Abensberg, Germany. It's the Kuchelbauer Tower, or yeah, the Tor. As you can see, it is very colorful again, and the shapes are very different. Not very straight lines, very different from that Bauhaus style, the gray and the geometric shapes. It kind of looks very whimsical, out of like a fantasy world. And a lot of Hundertwasser's work was around the like German-speaking areas. So a lot of his work is in Austria, in a lot of rural parts of Austria, but also in Germany, in these places, because again, he was Austrian. And he did, I guess, get commissioned to do work around the world, but specifically most of his paintings or most of his work, I guess, architectural work, was in these German-speaking domains. But as you can see, it's just very different from that. And he used his art to advocate for, again, like a more colorful, cheerful lifestyle. Because like with the Hundertwasser House in Vienna, when I went there in the, like on the, I guess, description is to say that he wanted people to kind of have more of a whimsical way of life and not be so serious as well, which is why the colors are sticking out. But so what was his impact, I guess? Why was all this important? Well, for one, it was a reaction against that Bauhaus style. It had people thinking of different ways of using architecture instead of being so geometric and so sterile. And it was pretty organic and started kind of like this organicist way of developing houses. It changed the use of nature in art. He really put the forefront on using greenery, using natural elements like trees and plants in art, like architecture, he was really the first person to do that. And again, just was encouraging organic methods so that it's not so straight lined or square housing. So Hundertwasser, again, died in 2000, so he's a pretty contemporary artist. Vienna has seen a lot of art and artists, so it's pretty interesting to check out its history, I guess. So yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and do the conclusion, unless Sneha wants to add anything else. Okay, so basically, I mean, this doesn't have to be the end of the conversation, but our conclusion is that art can be used in a lot of different ways. People who have like the talent of being able to produce art can use it in more than just an aesthetic way. It can be used more than just entertaining someone or trying to create something that's beautiful, but it can be thought-provoking as well. There are a lot of different examples of this, not only in architecture around the world, but also just art in general. It can be thought-provoking. and performance art especially. So it can be used to convey ideas that people want to see done, just like what's her name, Rummana Hussain? Am I saying it right? Yeah, Rummana Hussain and Friedensreich Hundertwasser worked on to convey ideas and values, and it can also be used as activism, which is pretty effective, I guess, in a different way of advocating for a cause or an idea than just protesting or going and like giving a speech about something. I mean, these are all basically just don't count art out, I guess, if you want to advocate for something, because there's different ways to do it, and sometimes art can be more effective in like, I guess, getting your point across. Think of all the books written as satires on different things, such as like Brave New World or 1984 by George Orwell. These are all books that and writers who used art basically in order to send a message across, and we're still reading them today, especially like in school, very impactful. So yeah, thanks for listening, you guys. I guess that's all that I have. So okay, so I'll be done in a minute. So yeah, sorry. I'm about to get kicked out of my place. But yeah, do you want to add anything, Sneha?
No, not really. I just want to say, like you were saying, art, you shouldn't count art out. It is a very, like, art is used to express yourself, and it can be found in like many different forms, like as you were like mentioning, like authors, like literature's art, dancing, singing, performance art, paintings, like anything that can be used to express yourself and your beliefs can be counted as art. And like even like architecture, like sculpture, stuff like that. So these things are very important to our life and to human society. It's often considered, like, art is often considered the thing that sets humans apart from like animals. And so remember to like follow, like, if you want to express yourself, like, definitely do it. Don't be afraid to, because that's important. And also don't think that the arts and like literature and humanities and stuff like that, like, it's just as important, and it can as like sciences, and it can fuel social revolutions, as you can see. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Just one last question. Does anyone want to be an artist, or like can anyone do anything like with art, whether it's musically or being like an artist or writing? You just raise your hand if that interests you, or if you were able to do it. Awesome. So we have a couple of artists. When I was your age, I also wanted to be an artist, and it's still something that I like to do. So very cool. Well, thank you guys for listening. I know we finished a little early today, but hopefully that's all right. And I hope you have a good rest of your day, your weekend.
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for your thoughtful answers, especially too. It was great.
Yeah, that's great.